But we find it interesting to look at these 10 companies because if you do believe this is an industry that is about to take off, you want to be positioned in the companies that has as much exposure, maybe risk spread out exposure to this industry, so that when this industry starts taking off, you will likely be invested in some of the companies that see the biggest growth in share price.
Right.
And in overall.
So based on that, I mean, these 10 companies, for those who haven't downloaded the report from our website yet, can you list them? Can you tell me which ones they are? And maybe we can start doing our deep dive.
In no specific priority here, we were starting out with some of the earliest companies, the first movers in the industry of the publicly traded ones.
Welcome back to the Natural Hydrogen Investment Podcast, where we help you understand the rapidly evolving investment opportunity in natural hydrogen. I'm Anthony Muhye, chemical engineer and hydrogen enthusiast.
And I'm Morten, Stahl, industry expert and founder of Specialized Investor Natural Hydrogen Ventures.
In this episode, we're going to talk about the biggest natural hydrogen players and do a deep dive into the top 10 publicly traded natural hydrogen companies. But before we begin, don't forget that you can download our free 2025 investor report on our website, nath2investing.com. That is nath2investing.com. You'll get plenty of insights and information on the top 10 companies we'll talk about today. Also, if you watch us on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe so you can support us. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, go ahead and subscribe to us and leave us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate it. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and start this episode. Morten, so tell me more about this story behind these natural hydrogen companies. I know there's 10 big ones we'll be talking about today, but why have these 10 been picked?
There's now so many companies working this space. What is kind of the thing for most of them, I would say all of them, is they are coming out of oil and gas. They have experienced people knowing how to run oil and gas companies, how to do exploration, and now they're moving into this. Quite a few actually, when we start talking, is out of the mining industry, but still the same thing. They're experienced with the geology, and they actually know the type of rock that you'll be looking for natural hydrogen. The mining companies know this really well. So the 10 companies that we'll be covering today is what we call, out of the 30 or a bit more than 30 publicly traded companies, these are the 10 companies that offers the highest exposure to natural hydrogen. This means that you would have, of course, in these 10, the companies that works only with natural hydrogen. And outside the index, you would have some companies that do something else as well. And that is by no means a bad thing. If you want a company that gives you exposure to natural hydrogen, but actually also makes money, you can find this. But as I quickly remember, likely not in the index, because this is a new industry and you're still racing for revenue. But if the company works with oil and gas and mining on the side, they might have revenue stream. So that kind of gives you a lot of different flavors. But we find it interesting to look at these 10 companies because if you do believe this is an industry that is about to take off, you want to be positioned in the companies that has as much exposure, maybe risk spread out exposure to this industry, so that when this industry starts taking off, you will likely be invested in some of the companies that see the biggest growth in share price.
Right.
And in overall.
And that's very interesting because I think that these companies, they are, despite the risk they're taking, of course, because more exposure to natural hydrogen means more exposure to risk, means less exposure to other more predictable resources or predictable revenue streams, which is interesting. So based on that, I mean, these 10 companies, for those who haven't downloaded the report from our website yet, can you list them? Can you tell me which ones they are? And maybe we can start doing our deep dive.
In no specific priority here, we were starting out with some of the earliest companies, the first movers in the industry of the publicly traded ones. We have a company like Hytera, which was actually the first one to list. They listed in December 2022. They took over an existing shell, meaning if you go back and look at stock prices, you would see a lot of data that is not relevant for Hytera. But since December 2022, it's been Hytera. And while they are listed in Australia in an exchange called ASX, they do work in US. So it's a US-focused company that is listed in ASX. And this might be we'll do a quick stop to mention that in Australia, the ASX and a few exchanges in Canada and to some degree in UK, you have this type of companies that do early stage resource exploration and an investor base that is used to investing in these high risk, high reward kind of companies. If you are based in Denmark, as I am, the investor space does not know of these kind of companies. You do not have early stage exploration companies in Denmark, but if you're based in the before mentioned countries, you will know this already. But because this is available, you have seen in this industry that likely half of the companies operating in this industry are already publicly traded, because there seems to be an investor appetite that understands this risk reward. So back to Hytera. Hytera works in the US, in Kansas. They have 70,000 acres and are just about to drill. So this will be interesting to see. They're working in probably the most crowded space in the world to some degree, the northeastern part of Kansas. We'll touch on Canada later. That might be a bit more crowded, but we'll get to this. This is also the area where the really big guy, Coloma, private company, is rumored to be working as well, and a few other companies that we'll get back to. Like many of the other companies, Hytera has an experienced oil and gas team from top down, I would say. Another ASX listed company is Gold Hydrogen. They were listed in January 2023. Not that I remember every listing date of these companies, but Gold was interesting because it was kind of the second one, and they were a straight normal listing, raising surprisingly a lot of money. I think 20 million Aussie dollars, an amount that Hytera just raised recently. So Gold Hydrogen was quickly out of the gate, taking a lot of space. Australia is a big country. So in Australia, you always get licenses the size of Belgium or something, or Denmark. This is huge. And they have an area in York Peninsula and an island called Kangaroo Island. And I just remember when you're telling people about this new amazing industry and you tell them there's an Australian company working in Kangaroo Island, they think you're, such a weirdo, does this island really exist? But it does. But they have already drilled now, not on Kangaroo Island, but in the York Peninsula. They kind of retested some really, really old wells that showed hydrogen when they drilled in the 20s and the 30s. They actually still have hydrogen. They haven't yet discovered the flow they really need, but definitely the front runner in the industry, maybe behind the private company Coloma, for that simple reason that they have already drilled wells. And they are also, Gold Hydrogen, the most highly valued company at 100 million Aussie dollars as of today.
And just to interrupt you, I mean, if you saw me grinning, if you saw me moving around, it was because I just had to show this on camera. Gold Hydrogen, they really know how to do marketing. I mean, look what they gave us at HNAT. This was the conference in Paris in November. Very beautiful little koala plushie. So
they're playing the Australian card, no doubt. And they saved me. I brought these koalas home to my kids so that I had something for them. So thank you, Gold Hydrogen, for that. But back to the business. Operating in the same area as Hytera, you have Top End Energy, which is recently an Australian-focused company, both on oil and gas and some natural hydrogen exploration. But they acquired Serpentine Energy. Full disclosure, in Serpentine Energy, we were early investors, but now they're owned by Top End Energy. Top End Energy has focused now, almost it seems from their communication, completely on natural hydrogen. They're still building up their position in Kansas, and I think the latest communication from them said that they are getting ready to drill maybe later in the year. They're trying to map out where to drill.
I think Top End Energy, they had a new CEO in the past few months.
Yeah, and that's kind of where you can deduct it. These companies, because Top End still has some legacy assets. But when you see they're bringing in Luke, who was the CEO of Serpentine Energy, to be the Top End Energy CEO now, it shows the focus. So Top End Energy is up there amongst the companies offering the highest exposure to natural hydrogen, it seems. Another company who does offer this high exposure is Primary Hydrogen of Canada. This is kind of a recent company, has some small mining companies. It's one of many mining companies pivoting into this industry. I think mining assets somewhere, but now have, I think, 5 or 6 or 7 different hydrogen licenses of Canada. And recently also in the US. Quite funny, it was in Colorado, I remember they took their first US hydrogen license, which is kind of out of the area where we've seen other focused, which is mainly in Kansas or in Iowa along a geological structure called the Mid-Continental Rift that we could deep dive on another day. So definitely through primary H2, you get a lot of different areas. You're exposed to a lot of different areas.
And I think primary hydrogen is also exposed to other types of resources, right? Because
yeah, but that's very small. Some small amount. They have a legacy mining license, but no operations.
right,
So something
that's
that
good
I
to
would
know.
be looking at, if I'm looking for pure natural hydrogen, I want to make sure that companies don't spend that money on other things. But if I was as an investor looking at something that will kind of, spreading the risk a bit, you might like them having something else. And something else is offered the company also from Canada called Max Power, which is a lithium miner. So if you are looking for how can I get two energy transition things for the price of one, Max Power kind of delivers. They have US lithium mining. I guess they are probably waiting to do something with them until the lithium price kind of gets back up. But they have also started to take a lot of hydrogen licenses in Saskatchewan, in Canada. Canada is really frontier work in natural hydrogen, but Saskatchewan seems to be one of the places where it seems there'll be a good way to go out and be allowed to drill, because Saskatchewan is a state that is really much into oil and gas, subsurface, have a lot of uranium mining. So it seems to be a really interesting place they've been working. They've spent a lot of energy building up their team lately. You've seen, if you look at their website and the stock exchange side, they're listed in the Canadian Stock Exchange, by the way, which is kind of a smaller exchange. Some investors might find it a bit difficult to access it, but they are listed in the US as well, where you can get these kind of US depository stocks instead. So look out for this. But they do have a lot of new team members. It seems to be picking quite the different ones from around the industry.
Oh yeah. By the way, Morten, I wanted to ask you more about this new company in the index recently added. They had a huge announcement and now they're all into natural hydrogen. Can you tell me more about them? I think it's Thor Energy, right?
You're exactly right. It's Thor Energy. Thor Energy is one of these companies moving, it seems, out of mining, pivoting into natural hydrogen. And while some of these companies seems to be, still riding both horses, doing a bit of both, Thor Energy seems very focused on natural hydrogen now. They are still communicating that they have their traditional lithium, uranium, copper exploration prospects, but very focused on natural hydrogen. And it's likely because what they acquired, they took over another company recently that has some really interesting acreage in southern Australia. What makes it stand out is that one of these licenses they took over is already granted, meaning they could go out and work it right away. And they spent some time and money getting what is called a resource assessment. And resource assessments, when you are not producing, is always risky. So full disclaimer on this. But we have seen a few in the industry. It is a thing that industry use, basically retooling when you do a resource estimate from oil and gas, moving that way of doing it into the natural hydrogen industry. And what came out of this was a resource estimate that is twice as high as the next highest natural hydrogen resource estimate. So for what it's worth, that's impressive. It seems that one of their licenses in Southern Australia, they have a best estimate of 2.6 million tons of hydrogen. Again, a lot of things could go wrong. Nowhere in the world is commercial hydrogen produced yet, but definitely interesting. And because of their so focused approach on natural hydrogen now, we brought them into the index. As you might remember, the index always consists of the 10 companies that gives investors the highest exposure to natural hydrogen.
Right.
So one of the other companies have to step aside, and now Thor Energy is in as the newest member of the index.
Right, perfect. So let's move on.
The next one is kind of news flow wise, a company that really is a big one. It's a QIMC or QI Materials Corp of Canada. They put out a lot of news. They have a team already working on their area in Quebec. They've done a lot of soil sampling operations that shows interesting results. One gotta remember that while it's definitely above average and seems really good, the industry is just still so new that we don't know if that translates into a reservoir in the subsurface. But it stands out, and while they haven't drilled deeper than just testing the upper layer, they are much more active than most because they're already out there. And their good result have actually attracted a lot of other Canadian mining companies to this area. These other mining companies are not part of the 10 with the most exposure. They're not part of our natural hydrogen index, but they are there on our website as well, and it probably means that Quebec is probably the most crowded area right now. You do have, I think, 5 or 6 companies that works this area or just on the other side of the border in Ontario, looking for kind of the same geology.
Yeah, and I'm aware of at least 1 or 2 stealth private companies that are in this space as well. They are doing some research, but my information is a bit outdated because this was last year. But it will be interesting to see who else shows up from these, or what else these companies become in the long term.
Totally. That will be interesting. And I think from an investment point of view, what to make of the fact that there's a lot of people working in this, companies working in the same area, it helps to remember, especially for a small country guy like me, that this is a massive state. So it's US and Canada. So it's not like there isn't room for them. But it could give you that there's an opportunity if some of them find something that has a good reflection on the other companies. And of course, also the other way around, if someone drills something and it's an empty well, maybe that will have an effect on the other companies working in the area when we're talking publicly traded companies.
Yeah, I also wanted to do a quick shout out to, as you mentioned just now, QIMC, they posting a lot of news. I wanted to shout out to the CEO, to John. I think he's been doing a good job of marketing his company. I think the rest of the companies should also, I'm not saying to emulate what he's doing, but a similar marketing approach would be smart. I think keeping the narrative going, keeping the narrative healthy is very good for the space and for each company. So
one can never be quite sure if that's the reason, but you do also see quite an impressive amount of volume trading in the shares of QIMC compared to others. It could reflect different things, how much is actually available for free trade, stuff like that, but still. But you will also see it's also one of the stocks that kind of shows the volatility that's expected in this industry. It moves up or down a lot, but that goes in general in this industry. Buckle up. It's going to be a ride, when you invest in natural hydrogen, because it's small early stage exploration companies. Moving on, we have 3 companies left. The next one will be 80 Mile. It's listed in the UK. They work both Greenland and Finland, starting out as a mining company, moving into natural hydrogen. Finland is an interesting area because you actually have a lot of still open wells that you can test. So that excited me when they started out. It seems that they have sold the actual mining operation in Finland now, or planning to, but they keep the right to do natural hydrogen exploration, which is what I value. What they have in Greenland is close to pulsar helium's hydrogen and helium licenses. They have also recently moved into, it seems, a more classical green hydrogen, or biomass fuel project in Italy, something that I will still have to wrap my head around what's exactly they're thinking here. But the fact that they are, to my knowledge, the only company working in Finland, which has a lot of historic hydrogen shows, which makes it an interesting country, and with a mining and resource mindset. So you would expect it that you could easily operate in this country.
have you ever been to Finland? Just off
No,
topic.
I haven't actually, and I'm embarrassed because, living in Scandinavia, I could. Might as well as, big country guys, they fly from one end to another. But, I think a 2-hour drive, that's so long. So as a Dane, I stay put.
Yeah, I haven't been either. Sorry.
Have you?
No, I haven't been either. So yeah.
Well, final 2, the second last is Buru Energy of Australia. ASX listed again. They are an oil and gas company pursuing a really big project in the northern part of Australia. They have an affiliate company, a subsidiary called 2H Resources, that controls a lot of applications in Australia. And this is where we could deep dive at some point into how things work in Australia. But the fact that they are applications means that they are first in line to get it when it actually becomes a license. So barring some weird things happening, they will get these licenses at some point, and they will then have almost as much as gold hydrogen has, which is probably, or for sure, the largest holder of natural hydrogen acreage in the world will be gold hydrogen. And Bure could be one of them. It looks like, from what they're communicating, that they are trying to see if they can kind of spin out and sell their H2 resources. Maybe that means they will be a standalone company at some point. We don't know, but there's no news on it lately.
Right.
And finally, interesting one, because when people look into a new industry, they would often refer to there's a high risk, and I'm going to find something. And have you ever heard that the gold industry in the US, the ones who really made money were the ones selling the picks and shovels and not the gold miners? And as a private investor, we also look for, are there any options for this kind of tech? But as the industry is still quite small, there's not that many options because there's not that many companies to sell stuff to. But GTech offers an interesting thing here because they are the closest we could get to a picks and shovel play. They have a lot of data that is sold to mining and oil and gas industry. They help them explore for whatever the companies want to explore, including natural hydrogen and geothermal, which sometimes get a bit related in how you explore for it. And crucially, they also have made joint ventures that give them a share in whatever natural hydrogen company might be built on the back of the research they're doing. So really interesting, because if this really takes off, when it takes off, they might have a lot of data that other people would need. And at the same time, if they continue what they've been doing so far, making these joint ventures, they might also be a way to get access into some different areas in the world where natural hydrogen are being explored.
So they might be positioning themselves to become a monopoly in natural hydrogen data. That's what you...
I don't think that's possible, because one of the brilliant thing with this industry is that there's so much data we have already, and that it's not in one specific company.
Right.
It's a good bridge to say to everyone looking into investing in this space, this is not a winner takes it all market. So even the guys we talked about earlier, Coloma, the biggest company, will not have this industry by itself, because there's so many places this can be found. And you would see oil and gas mining industry, even if you might only know a few, there's thousands of smaller junior companies. And there's no reason to think that this industry will be any different.
Right. So before we proceed to the final question of the day, I remember you said that there are more than just these 10 companies, because obviously now there's dozens of companies that are becoming natural hydrogen exploration companies. What happens when one of these other companies gets bigger and more exposed to natural hydrogen? Will these top 10 change, and how do you think it will change over time?
Well, whenever changes happen, we update the index, meaning that we will there'll be a switch of place. We'll have a new one coming into the index, one going out. The index, as it works, is equally weighted, meaning that every move of the stock price of one share moves the index as much as some of the other. This gets a bit technical, but we have created the index to kind of deliver a quick way to figure out where is this going. And you'll find the index embedded on the top of our website, nath2investing.com. And in this, you would see that lately it's gone a bit up, but from the outset, it's gone a bit down. And the reason why I think right now it's 11,000 something is because we built the index to begin with as imagining if you bought $1,000 worth of shares in the companies as they listed or pivoted, meaning that if you did so, you would still be in the money, but likely not following, the AI rockets in the same time frame. But this is how it should be read. From now on, it's the interesting way of keeping, finger on the pulse, checking, how this industry going. We update it every week. I think outside the index, there are a lot of companies, bigger and smaller. The biggest company that we have here is likely, I'm going to murder that name, Française de l'Énergie, because I'm not good at French. But I'll usually just call them FDE, which is their ticker. They're listed in Euronext in Paris. They do a lot of renewable energy, some natural gas exploration. They bought some green hydrogen projects in Norway. And they also have what you might find out there if you look into natural hydrogen. They are applying for the license of what I would call the Lorraine discovery. Because I think it's really interesting, but it's probably been too hyped because it hasn't been drilled. There might be a lot of hydrogen down there, but remains to be seen. Sadly, it's a bit further out than one might think. But if they were to find it and pursue it, the cool thing about this Lorraine area is that it's close to industry that really needs it. It's close to steel industry that could use the hydrogen, so it scores really high on the market access. Another interesting company, because what's interesting also at FDE is that it makes money. The same does Central Petroleum. Actually, it's a small oil and gas explorer and producer in Australia. And as a really rare thing in early stage industry, they make money, not from their natural hydrogen work, but from oil and gas. So that gives you some different flavors as an investor.
Right. I was going to ask you for a summary of the top 10 companies, but I think people who are watching this or listening to this, they can just go to nath2investing.com and find the investor report there. You just need to sign up to the contact form you will find. It's much easier than just telling you all of these companies again. But actually, my last question was more about the private companies, because I know there are a few companies here which are in the background, but not so much in the background. They're actually getting funded. And I've heard of at least 3 very strong companies, which are Coloma, Snowfox, and Vima. I think it's pronounced Vima. So, Morten, if you know something more than I do, maybe you should share it now, because I know many people here are interested.
Well, I think you're touching on something really important here. I do know a lot of things, Anthony, that I'm not even telling you, even if we're doing this together, because my main line of work is doing private investments. And that means that while I really, really like natural hydrogen investment, there's almost nothing I can talk about because it's all private and it's all, non-disclosure, NDAs up till here. That's why it's fun to talk about the public traded companies. This is why we're having so much fun doing this. But these 3 companies you mentioned, they have some public available information out there, so we can discuss them. Coloma, the biggest one, we mentioned a few times. It's impossible to discuss this industry without mentioning Coloma. So if you're new to this industry, do a quick search, look into Coloma. The key thing here is that a lot of big guys have invested into the Coloma. And right now, I think still the amount of investment into the whole industry, close to 2/3 is invested into Coloma. And that, as I said earlier, doesn't mean that they will be the only one, because they're also taking a huge risk being the really front runner. And this is not a winner takes it all game. But they are doing some interesting stuff, working, it seems, what I understand from other companies, announcing stuff, working primarily in the US. But they have just recently announced that they have created Coloma Australia, public available as well. Another company that has some interesting baggers is Snowfox. They're backed by Oxford Venture, which is the Oxford University, but also BP, the oil and gas company, which actually makes BP the first company going out saying we're looking into this. And we have actually made an investment. I think the Brazilian national oil company have also said they are looking into it, meaning that they have hired some people to, can we find it in Brazil? But the national oil and gas company kind of have to do this because it's a new entity. But it adds up, like with BP investment into Snowfox, it validates the industry. If they think it's worth doing, maybe it is. Rio Tinto, mining company, probably the biggest in the world, have invested into Snowfox as well. They are very experienced with the kind of subsurface that the companies that explore for natural hydrogen will be looking at. That's why it makes sense with mining companies as well. That's almost no public available data about Snowfox. So we don't know where they're operating, but kudos to them that they have gotten these investments. They are, from what I know, doing a great job. The same thing I think can be said of Vima HDRO, which is some of these kind of a bit separate part of the industry. They're doing stimulated hydrogen. They're basically focusing on the places where they say, we have the right rocks here, but for some reason the reaction, and that's mainly the iron water reaction, it's not happening. So what can we do to stimulate the rocks so that they produce the hydrogen we can then extract? Personally, I think that this has a lot of potential. It's difficult to say when will we start seeing this work and actually produce hydrogen. If I were forced to make a guess, I think we'll first see normal hydrogen production, and then we'll have the stimulated come on board as well. But maybe there will be places where you can produce hydrogen, but not as much. But then you can add some way of making the wells produce more with technology like VIMA H2.
Yeah. And
There's a
actually,
company called Addis Energy who just came out of stealth mode, it seems. Addis Energy seems to want to do subsurface, not only hydrogen, but ammonia. They'll go all the way turning it into ammonia, which I can't say if that, that's going to work. But I do like the fact that they're going straight to a substance that has a market. Because while hydrogen can be used for all kinds of brilliant stuff, it doesn't have that much of an available ready market where we're going to find it. But ammonia might have, or at least it's easier to transport than hydrogen. But that's another fun discussion we can have in a future podcast as well.
And actually, that's interesting. That's what I was about to interrupt you about. It was stimulated hydrogen. We're going to have an episode further ahead. I think, Morten, I'm not sure if you agree with me, we should have a specialist on board here to explain it and let us know what needs to be done, what process it involves. And that could be one of our first guests, actually. If everybody's interested, well, stay tuned because it's going to happen.
I totally agree. And I think, well, let's check who's there. But I want to say, looking back to, what kind of teams are you looking at? And full disclosure, I have not invested into VIMA H2. But I do know the guys. And I think it's a good example of where you see some new knowledge coming out of university and academia, could say, in one of the co-founders, and then an experienced oil and gas guy as the other co-founder. That's a really good match, that should be able to produce at least a good try in making this work.
Absolutely. Well, with that said, I remind you one last time that you can go and get all of this information on the report on our website. But I want to thank you for sticking by and watching all of this episode, listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're on Spotify or Apple, just go ahead, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. We love 5-star reviews. We really do, don't we, Morten?
We do. A lot.
We do. And YouTube, you can like and subscribe so you can get the updates. We post this podcast about bi-weekly. It should be bi-weekly. So you can just stay tuned when it comes out. And finally, just go ahead and check out our socials. We're on x.com, we're on LinkedIn, company page, and as I mentioned before, the podcast. So check us out and enjoy everything we have to share. Thank you and see you in the next episode, guys.